In the year of 2001, the most fierce video game console war embarked. It is kind as bloody and brutal that the world had not yet seen. The combatants were Xbox, PlayStation 2, Dreamcast, and GameCube. They were each talented in their own way. Xbox had the absolutely highest hardware spec. PS2 had backward compatibility with PS1 games. Dreamcast was the earliest to the market about a year and a half, and GameCube had the best first-party games. So who came out this bloodbath alive? Let me take you back in history and experience the console wars again, starting from the 6th generation video game consoles. With the more powerful hardware, the 6th generation consoles all supported way more polished and high-performance 3D games. The first console to throw its hat into the ring was Sega Dreamcast, which had a year and a half head start in Japan and a year head start in the US. Some of the standout features were the memory cards had screens and could be used as mini consoles, and it also had early internet connectivities where you can play online games with friends, which is pretty innovative at the time. However, its shortcomings were also significant. Number 1, the Dreamcast used GD-ROM discs, which were essentially a slightly higher capacity CD that held 1 GB data. This was good because it was cheaper to manufacture than DVDs. However, games also couldn't be nearly as big. In contrast, DVDs hold 8.5 GB data, so developers could write more complicated games with more levels and assets. The third major problem is pirates soon figured out how to pirate games on burned CDs, so the market quickly flooded with pirated Dreamcast games. Unfortunately, this became the last straw that broke the camel's back. Sega decided to kill the console after just 2 years. They also completely quit the console business since then and only been focusing on making games. So clearly, Player 1 has left the game. The PlayStation 2 came out next in 2000 and continued on with the success story of the PS1, selling 155 million consoles. So what led to the continued success? First, PlayStation 2 used DVDs, which could hold a lot more data. Plus, the system can also play any DVDs, so you can use it to play movies. I know it sounds very normal today, but back then, people were used to having dedicated DVD players instead of having this all-in-one system, so it's quite a saving. The PlayStation 2 also had backward compatibility with nearly the whole PS1 library, so you can still enjoy all your collection. This was especially critical for the PS2 success, as they can easily carry over their existing customer base. Next thing to highlight, the PS2 had tons of great third-party games, like Grand Theft Auto 3, Final Fantasy X, Metal Gear Solid 2. These all contribute to a great success for PS2, which ended up selling more than all of the other 6th-gen consoles combined. So there you go, you have one of the winners now. Next up was the Nintendo GameCube. With the GameCube, Nintendo finally dropped the cartridges and moved on to discs. However, they chose mini DVDs rather than the full-size DVDs, which held 1.4 GB data. It continues to have some of the best first-party games, like Super Smash Bros. Melee, Mario Kart Double Dash, Luigi's Mansion, and Super Mario Sunshine. The GameCube, however, never really hit its groove, as a lot of people saw it as the console for kids, even though games like Resident Evil 4 were GameCube exclusive at launch. In the end, the GameCube sold only 21 million consoles, which was even less than N64 did. Even Nintendo didn't decide to quit the race just like Sega did. The GameCube was considered a financial failure. Now I know you have all been waiting for the last player to join the game was Microsoft Xbox. By the way, it was just called Xbox at the time, and Xbox One was actually a much later version, so please don't get confused. Talking about the first Xbox, it kinda shook up the video game console market, as Microsoft didn't follow the rule to make a dedicated console hardware like the rest of the players. Instead, their console was nearly the same as a game PC, including an Intel processor, a video graphic card, and a hard drive. At its core, it ran on a specialized version of Windows 2000, which allowed the existing PC games to be ported over very easily. The Xbox also had an Ethernet port, which was used for Xbox Live, a fairly competitive online service that still exists today, but after a bajillion times of name changing, of course. To call out, they also made very strong first-party games, the most famous ones being the Halo series. There are also tons of great third-party games, like Star Wars, Knights of the Old Republic. It won't be an overstatement to say that Xbox revolutionized the console systems, at least from the hardware perspective. At the time, if you compare any cross-platform games on the Xbox, say with a PlayStation, like Grand Theft Auto 3, it looks way better and smoother on the Xbox. The Xbox sold around 24 million, which puts it a very distant second place, behind PlayStation 2. The most sales were also in the US. Still, not bad for Microsoft's first outing into the consoles. I'd say Xbox survived the bloody competition and gathered experience for future bouts, and thus ended the sixth generation of console wars. If we call the sixth gen the most bloody competition, then the seventh gen would be the most dramatic one. First off, after the disappointing sales of N64 and the GameCube, Nintendo knew they needed a change. Instead of doing the same things as their competitors to compete on powerful hardware, they decided to create a fun console that aimed at casual gaming. What they came up with was Wii. I'm sure you all recall the phenomenon at the time that friends gathered together playing Wii Sports or Mario Kart with the motion controller, right? Most friends I knew at the time owned a Wii at home, regardless if they had played video games before. The Wii sold more than 100 million consoles, quite a lot better than either Sony or Microsoft had managed. What is even more amazing is, in terms of hardware, it is actually just an upgraded GameCube with motion controls. That means Nintendo had a good profit margin on hardware and shortened their R&D time. They also successfully repositioned themselves into another tier of the console, and that's why even today, regardless if you're on Team Green or PlayStation, it's very common to also own a Switch at the same time, because again, it's for casual gamers, right? With this smart strategy shift, Nintendo quickly reinstated themselves in the video game market and showed us how a textbook comeback story is done. So remember, there's always hope, just find your niche and keep trying. Alright, enough about the life lessons. Let's continue. In the 7th gen, with Sega bowing out of the console business, the remaining competition was up to Microsoft and Sony, with their PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, where they both went for the powerful consoles that could support HD resolution. The Xbox 360 was the one that came out first with nearly a year head start. It also started off Microsoft's tradition of giving their console names that made absolutely no sense. It goes 360, Xbox One, then Series X or S. The 360's reception was quite strong at first. However, there was a hardware defect called the Red Ring of Death that was caused by internal connections degrading due to overheating. This was such a huge hit it nearly took Microsoft out of the console business. In order to survive, Microsoft decided to fix the issue and cover the cost by extending their warranties to 3 years and paid out an estimated $1 billion for the repair. At critical times like this, you would realize how important it is to have a diversified business, as, thank God, their other divisions like Windows and Offices were still reining in the money so that they can cover the loss. Now, one of the highlights to call out for Xbox in this round would be the release of the Kinect, the motion sensoring camera with fun games, which was the fastest selling video game peripheral ever, selling 8 million units within the first 60 days and 35 million over its lifetime. I have always been the biggest fan of Kinect, played tons of sports and dancing games with my friends and family. It totally opened up new market segments that wasn't in the Xbox family before. It was also seen as a black magic technology, as at the time, image recognition wasn't as popular yet. Over the lifetime of the Xbox 360, it sold a whopping 85 million consoles. Not bad job. The Sony PlayStation 3 came out a year later with similar hardware spec, except their console had a Blu-ray player that people could watch HD movies with. However, it cost $100 more than Xbox 360. Initially, the price hurt the PlayStation sale, but after some price drops, plus Microsoft's own problems with the dead consoles, the PS3 managed to catch up. Another thing helped was the PS3 had great first-party exclusives, like God of War, Gran Turismo 5, and The Last of Us. At the end, they managed to just barely outsell the Xbox 360, selling 87 million consoles. When the dust had finally settled in the 7th gen, Who would have guessed that it was the Nintendo Wii with the weakest hardware that took the lead by a lot? Who would also guess that PS3 still beat the Xbox sales even though it was 1 year later to the market? Now it's time for 8th generation. With no new combatants, the game was still between Nintendo, Sony, and Microsoft. Nintendo was the first to come out with the Wii U. The big upgrade here was Wii U itself had a screen built into the controller, which could either wirelessly mirror or display different content. This might sound like the Switch today, however, the video was actually transmitted from a base unit. Unlike the crazy popular Wii, the Wii U actually sold terribly, as people did not find it innovative at all, selling only 13 million consoles, before Nintendo killed it and moved on quickly. Well, maybe the engineers and the PMs from Nintendo were not thinking creatively enough after the glorious success of Wii. Next up, the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One came out almost at the same time in November 2016 and had nearly the same hardware. Both were built with chips from AMD and had similar architectures. However, the PlayStation 4 had a much more powerful graphics chip, which gave better frame rates and resolution. But unbelievably, the Xbox One actually cost $100 more as it's bundled in the next generation Connect. This would really set the tone for the battle between the two systems, as the PlayStation sold about twice as much as Xbox did. After a year of insisting, Microsoft finally agreed to sell the Connect separately, which brought down the price to the same level. But wait a second, why is it bad to bundle with Connect? Wasn't it the world's most popular video game peripheral last time? Yeah, I know it's so sad, especially for hardcore Kinect lovers like me. But by 2014, most people had gotten over the gimmick of Kinect and did not want to pay the extra $100. Midway through the generation, Microsoft and Sony both released hardware updates, the PlayStation 4 Pro and Xbox One X, which were both way more powerful than the base consoles. These hardware upgrades were also the reason that 8th generation consoles lasted longer, pushing from the typical 5 years lifespan to 7 years. Finally, the Nintendo Switch appeared. Even though Nintendo already had a Wii U this generation earlier, its failure prompted Nintendo to quickly launch its successor, the Switch. Okay, so I'm changing my statement here again. Nintendo clearly still have very smart engineers and PMs. Now, at first glance, you might think this looks sort of like a Wii U, but the portability nature of the system is an absolute game changer. It perfectly combined and enabled the seamless transition between game consoles and the handheld consoles. Even though the system is only a bit more powerful than the Wii U, it has been massively popular, selling more than 105 million copies. As always, Nintendo makes the most classic first-party games. In addition, unlike with the Wii U, the Switch has a ton of great third-party games, and the indie developers love it too. Sharing some of my very own experience here, due to its pickup and the playstyle, it is currently my most played console, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. Once again, Nintendo showed us how to play a brilliant combat game. Finally, we come to the most recent generation of consoles. The next gen bursted onto the world stage in November of 2020. As you all know, the only two players this time are PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X. From the hardware perspective, they're again pretty close. Both have AMD chips, and while Xbox has a bit faster graphics, the PlayStation has faster storage. So what features differentiate them? On the Team Green, you have some cool software features like quick resume from switching games within a few seconds. You also have Game Pass, where hundreds of games are included with a subscription service, and you can even stream them in the highest tier, Game Pass Ultimate. On Team Sony, you have fantastic first-party games like God of War, Horizon Forbidden West, and Ghost of Tsushima. Okay, well, these are also on the PS4, but they just look way better on PS5. Really, the only odd one out is the Xbox Series S that costs $300 instead of $500. Now, Xbox developers are required to make sure that games work on both Series S and X, which could drag down the quality of the games. Well, only time will tell that if Series S will hold back Xbox. With high demand and supply chain issues during the pandemic, both Microsoft and Sony are selling their consoles as fast as they can make them. And by October 2022, it seems like Sony has an edge on sales, as it is 15 million versus 21 million. Now, where's Nintendo in all of this? Well, remember, Switch was launched very late as an 8th gen and is still selling extremely well, so they don't feel rushed to have another generation consoles, especially since the OLED model gave a decent bump to sales, plus those special editions like Animal Crossing, Splatoon 3, Pokemon, which I'm really trying hard to get. Will they come out with a Switch 2 or Switch Pro? I have no way to know, but as a fan I can tell that what they should really nail is the backward compatibility with all the Switch games. Alright, don't you feel you just watched the big Hollywood action film? You're welcome and no need to pay tickets, but just clicking on the like and subscribe would be great. The console evolution history is so exciting as it's really not only about the hardware, the software, the technology, but more about the vision, the creativity, and finally how to delight the customers. Bonus point, steal some life lessons while you're at it too. Thank you so much for watching. I'm your host Little Bear. Until next time, signing off.